It's 8:24 on this Friday morning, the 9th of April. Remember when this sound hit the world's airwaves? Anarchy in the UK, it changed everything. Sid Vicious, Johnny Rotten, the Sex Pistols, of course, and the man behind the band, musical entrepreneur and fashion leader, Malcolm Mclaren. Malcolm Mclaren has died from cancer overnight at the age of 64. He was a singer in his own right too, but Malcolm Mclaren was best known as the man who brought punk to the world, as the manager of the Sex Pistols in the mid-70s. Colin Patterson is the BBC's entertainment reporter who's interviewed most of the who's who of the British music industry, including, over the years, Malcolm Mclaren and the Sex Pistols. He joins us now from London. Colin, welcome to ABC Radio National.
Good morning.
Malcolm Mclaren and punk, those two things go hand in hand, don't they?
Absolutely. That is what he will be remembered for, as the man who brought punk to England and Britain. He went over to New York at the start of the 70s after he left art school in London and discovered a band called the New York Dolls, and they were very influential in the punk scene. He tried to launch them over here in Britain. It didn't quite work out. They split up, so he got his hand on three young guys and formed this band, the Sex Pistols. They needed a singer, and he found a guy called Johnny Lydon when he came into his shop and got him to audition for the band by singing along to an Alice Cooper record in the shop. And he claims that he created the name the Sex Pistols, not the group. And within a year they were getting banned from British TV for swearing. He was organising boat trips up the Thames to get publicity because God Save the Queen, the track that they tried to get to number one the year of the Queen's Silver Jubilee, it was kept off number one. Some say the charts were fixed to keep the Sex Pistols off number one at that special time. They put Rod Stewart at the top of the charts. The Sex Pistols had to make do with number two, but the Sex Pistols got all the headlines.
So Johnny Lydon, of course, became Johnny Rotten. There was Sid Vicious. This was a band that Malcolm Mclaren did more than manage, as you've indicated. He almost created it. And how much was he involved with the band in trying to create those sorts of scandals you just talked about there? Trying to get God Save the Queen at number one in that year, for instance. He was a stirrer.
He knew exactly what he was doing. When the Bill Grundy TV moment that I alluded to, where the Sex Pistols swore on TV and suddenly became front-page tabloid news at a time where music didn't get reported on the front page of newspapers, he absolutely loved that. He loved the wheeling and dealing, the coming up with scams. And even when the Sex Pistols split up in 1978, he kept them going because Johnny Rotten had run by then. He still kept them going by making dreadful movies. The Great Rock and Roll, well, I say dreadful, very biased movies. His point of view on what happened with the Sex Pistols. He even turned himself into a bit of a singer in that, singing in that movie. And there was all kinds of court battles throughout the 80s between him and Johnny Rotten as to who owned the name the Sex Pistols. Johnny Rotten claimed he was underpaid and eventually won a court case, winning lots of back royalties. And they were on very poor terms throughout the rest of their life. I spoke to Johnny Rotten 2 years ago. In fact, when Malcolm Mclaren was supposed to come to Australia to appear in a British reality show. Do you know I'm a Celebrity? Do you get that in Australia?
Yeah.
Well, he was going to be a contestant, but at the last moment decided he wouldn't do it, and I interviewed Johnny Rotten that day. Yeah, and then Johnny Rotten was slagging him off, saying, I did that show 2 years previously. He always copied everything I did. He's been living off my coattails for years. So very acrimonious till the end between those two.
I don't know if you can accuse Malcolm Mclaren generally of coattailing, because although he basically created punk rock with the Sex Pistols, before that he created punk fashion along with Vivienne Westwood, his longtime partner.
The shop Let It Rock on the King's Road that they sort of sold originally at the start of the 70s Teddy Boy gears, but after that trip to New York he came back and started selling bondage clothing and the clothes that became, so identifiable with the punk movement. It changed its name to Sex. They famously sold a t-shirt with two cowboys doing an act I could not possibly mention on breakfast radio in Australia, which led to the police coming into the shop and taking away some of their stock. I mean, that's how controversial they were. But there are all kinds of different theories as to who really invented the Sex Pistols. He was obviously very involved, but if you see The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, you get his side of the story. If you see the documentary The Filth and the Fury, you'll get the Sex Pistols side of the story.
All right, Colin Patterson, thanks very much for joining us on Breakfast.
Pleasure.
Colin Patterson is the BBC's entertainment reporter, joining us there from London, and he's interviewed Malcolm Mclaren and the likes of Johnny Rotten and plenty of others over the years. And he was saying there, Malcolm Mclaren, obviously a genius, a creative genius in terms of his impact on popular culture in rock and roll, punk rock, in punk fashion. He was also a bit of a performer himself. Let's hear a bit from Malcolm Mclaren, another sound he brought to the world, this track, Buffalo Girls.